So yeah, this is just a summary of what we've covered. So today's really is all about how to plan a 5S activity. So building on what we did last time with the 5S audits. So yeah, we asked you to look at what you could apply the 5S audits to pick an area. So this is with the 5S audit sheets that we sent out. Just pick an area within your business. Try using it. See what kind of things it helps you to identify. As I said, it's slightly different to the waste walk. You know, it's getting you more focused on sort of like the visual elements of the workplace itself. So what signage are you using? How do you communicate to people? So it's looking at all those kind of elements of the workplace. Whereas the waste walk itself is looking at how much time do you spend doing things and how long do you have to walk. Whereas the 5S audit is slightly different. It's more about the visual elements. So sometimes you get different results and you get different set of ideas and improvements. So hopefully when you get a chance to trial these 5S audits, it'll be interesting to see what kind of things you identify in your operations. So this is what we're going to cover today. Bit of a review, bit of a discussion, step-by-step guide on how to actually go about carrying out a 5S event, or what we call a 5S Kaizen within an operation. I've got some step-by-step guides that I'll send out to you as well. So the idea of the step-by-step guides that we'll send out at the end of today is so that you can have a bash at doing these kind of things yourselves. So you should be able to pick this document up, read it through, and use it as a basis for carrying out 5S activities. And then what I want to talk about afterwards is, it's great with 5S, you know, you get a lot of enthusiasm when it comes to applying it initially, and when it comes to sort of like getting a place for everything and everything in its place and getting rid of all the clutter. The more difficult element of 5S is how do you sustain it? How do you make it a part of the culture? So I'll spend a little bit of time talking about how you sustain the improvements itself and how you make sure that you carry on doing it and it's just not a one-off activity. And then at the end, we'll talk about the next stages of getting you to think about how you can actually go about implementation within your own business. So we'll talk through what I want to cover as part of the last two parts of the presentation and the modules. So summary of last week, the 5 S's. You've got the sort, set, shine, standardise, and sustain. So the sort is getting rid of all the clutter. The set is a place for everything in its place. The shine, people talk about a 5-minute shine. So end of shift, end of day, you're making sure everything's put back the way it should be so that you can find the things that you need. And so when people start the next day, they're not spending time hunting down, trying to find brooms or brushes or equipment or packaging materials, whatever it is that you use within the operation. The standardise is all about documenting the best way of organising the operation itself. I tend to use pictures. So I tend to use pictures as a way of standardising things so that the picture becomes a visual standard of what the work area should look like at the end of each day. And as a manager, I'd be going down, and if the area didn't look like the picture, trying to understand the reason why, and looking at what we could do to make sure that it did do the next day. And then the sustain bit of it is getting everybody to work this way. New starters, anyone joining the business, anyone coming on a temporary basis, they all pick up on these 5S principles quickly and they adopt them quickly. So that it's not just a one-off activity, it's something that you keep repeating over and over again, which is why this is shown as a group of circles with arrows indicating that it's a continuous improvement loop. So a bit like what we've talked about before with things like plan, do, check, act. The idea being this should be a continuous improvement loop. It's not something you just do as a one-off. You constantly go around the loop looking at how you can fine-tune and improve the process even further. Everyone all right with that? And as I mentioned before, more and more now, people are using the workplace itself as a way of selling the business. So if you've got customer visits, if you deal with any of the big supermarkets, people like Marks and Spencer's, for example, they're very much key to them is what the workplace organisation looks like. So as part of their audits, the way they assess suppliers, one element of that is the workplace and the 5S being adopted within the business. So trying to make it visual, trying to make it look like it's well organised as well as being well organised is another element behind it. And as well as making it look attractive to new customers, it's also a good way of just what we've been talking about now, about retaining staff and getting more and more staff to want to stay within the business, and staff retention. It's a good way of ensuring you get or improving your chances of staff retention as well, as particularly those common areas, just like accommodation, or if you've got any shared canteen facilities and things like that. If you've got good 5S in those areas, people hopefully want to work in those areas. So this is what we covered last time, the 5S audit. So for each of the 5S's, there's a series of questions, and you basically rate yourself 0 to 4, and you identify improvement ideas. And then at the bottom, you total up the scores. You give yourself a score. I think the maximum score is going to be 100. You give yourself a score out of 100, and then 125. And then basically, you off that score, you hopefully you're going to improve things by carrying out actions and improving things over a period of time. You improve your score, and that's your measure of continuous improvement, is that score. And quite often, I'll show you a radar chart in a moment that's been plotted out, but we plot these scores out on the radar chart. And when you do this initially, you'll have quite a small plot. It'll be a relatively small area around the centre of the radar. But as you do more and more improvement activities, the size of the radar will grow, and that's a visual indication of how the area is improving. So that's the 5S. This document really is a step-by-step guide. So how you go about carrying out 5S. So once you've done your audit, you'll have identified some weaknesses. Normally what I do to start off with, this is the very first thing that I normally do after we've done the 5S audit. I'll plan in a day whereby we get the team together. Normally, obviously after peak, you won't want to do this at peak for obvious reasons. So normally after peak, you may want to clear out some glass houses. You may want to clear out the pack area. There might be areas of the business that you want to sort of like restructure and reorganise. In fact, doing planning out a 1 day 5S activity is a really good way of doing that. So first thing is to pick your area. You won't want to do the whole area at once, the whole business at once. So normally what I do is I pick a small area within the business itself. So for example, dispatch, or a particular glass house, or a particular field. Then you pick your team. Who's going to be involved. I try and get as many people that work within that area as involved as possible, and in that way, people understand the reason why you're doing it. They understand the principles behind it. They've obviously been through the pain of getting the area looking nice and tidy, and therefore they're more likely to want to keep it that way. So by picking your team and picking it from people that work within that area itself, you've got a greater chance of making sure that it's sustained. Normally then I'd deliver a bit of an outline presentation. So normally a cut down version of this, usually just 1 or 2 slides that explain what 5S is and what the plan is for the 1 day. And then we go about doing the sort, the set and the shine. So the sort will be get rid of all the clutter. The set is a place for everything in its place. The shine, maybe sweeping things, cleaning things, painting the areas. So it's making sure it looks at its absolute optimum. And like I said, normally plan a 1 or a 2, if you're lucky, a 2-day block where you can carry out these particular activities. So yeah, so basically you've got your dates in of where you're going to carry this out. You identify who's going to be involved. You make sure those dates are in people's diaries and it's planned into people. You brief them on what it is that they're going to be doing. So a bit like what we were just talking about there with that visual management board. I used to write out on post-it notes what was involved, who was going to be doing what, and when they were going to do it by. And then that way, people were fully aware of what was involved. If you needed meeting rooms, I used to book out the meeting rooms right at the start. So where you were going to display the visual management boards, for example, or if you were going to take a corner of the restroom or the canteen, just making sure that everyone were aware that you're going to put some whiteboards up to brief people and explain to people what was going to be going on a daily basis. Step 8, I used to, as a reward for the team, I always used to book refreshments for the team. So I'd always make sure there were teas and coffees and drinks and biscuits, and I'd also get a buffet lunch in. Just that way we could keep the team together. We could keep them together for the one-day activity. They didn't have to drift away and run the risk of not getting them back again in the afternoon, for example. So I used to find that just by doing little things like that, going back to what we were saying earlier, little hygiene, people remember that. If you go out your way to sort of like look after them and give them the refreshments and give them a really nice buffet lunch, people remember that and they'll want to get involved in future events. So that I was always very conscious that we did that for the team. So that'd be step 8, is making sure I looked after all those little hygiene factors. Step 9 is briefing everybody in the area that you're going to be carrying out the 5S. So they might not necessarily be involved in the 5S itself, but they might be working in the area where you're carrying out the 5S activity. So making sure it's not a surprise to anybody. So making sure everyone's fully aware of what's going on and when it's going on, and getting them involved in terms of coming up with ideas of how things could be improved. It might be they haven't got enough brooms, they haven't got enough brushes, they haven't got enough sweeping equipment, they haven't got enough bins. So, talking to people and trying to find out from them what kind of ideas that they've got about what could be done to improve the workplace organisation itself. That really helps when it comes to sort of like getting people to accept why we were doing this. And then any ideas that people had, step 10, I'd make sure they were up on the visual management board. So they get listed up as ideas for improvements, and then we'd work through them. We'd work our way through that list of improvements, and as we complete them, we'd put them on the done column of the visual management board, and just keep a log of what we'd done and what was still to be done. I also used to display the 5S audits as well, so people could see where the scores were low in a particular area, and just making sure that whatever actions we were doing, they were addressing some of the low scores that had come out of the 5S audit. I used to make sure beforehand, if I was going to do this, I had all the consumables that I needed. So making sure we had the brushes, cleaning equipment. Do you remember we talked about red tags? Where you red tag areas. If you're not using something within an area and you don't know why it's there, we used to put a red tag on it and then keep a list of the things that we'd found, and then email them out around the organisation and just get some confirmation from people as to whether it was required or not. So making sure we had plenty of red tags in. If we were going to paint the area to make the area look good, making sure we got paint. Any cleaning equipment, cleaning consumables that we needed to clean down machinery, we made sure we had that in. I'd always make sure we had some yellow floor tape so we could mark out gangways and mark out areas where people were going to drop pallets of goods in or packaging materials. So basically making sure everything you think you're going to need for the 5S audit, for the 5S event itself, making sure you've got that so that when you start running the event, there's not people wandering off to the shops to buy things. You've got your things that you need. I'd just display, if there were any items that needed to be done before the 5S event, I'd display them up on the visual management board, saying who was going to do what and when they were going to do it by. I'd identify, step 14, identify where any items that you've identified as red tagged that you wanted to dispose of, just identifying an area where you'd hold them before you decided on whether they were going to be kept or disposed of. We called it an auction area. So it was just an area of the business that we taped off, and everybody knew that items that had been left in there, that if they weren't claimed in some way, they were going to be disposed of. And we had an agreed date whereby at the end of that time, it would say 2 weeks, those items would be skipped. So it was just that we just identify where that area was going to be, where we were going to store all the items that we'd found. Step 15, I always used to get senior management to stand up at the start of the day and just do a brief and explain, what it was, why is it important to the business, and just to thank everybody for getting involved. And then the same at the end of the day as well, just get a senior manager to come down and just publicly to thank everybody and just to review what had been done. and just give their backing for if there are any purchasing that was required of any additional items, making sure that they would commit to buying those items. So step 16 is just having review meetings beforehand. So just making sure, because it's not often that you stop the operation for one day, so you want it to go as smoothly as possible. So a few days before, I'd just have a review with the team to make sure that we had everything that we needed, and just that we got all the consumables, we got the refreshments booked, we got the meeting room, any lifting equipment that we needed. We'd literally, we had everything arriving ready for the day itself. Step 17, risk assessment, especially if you've got people that are working in that area that have never worked in that area before. So just carrying out a risk assessment to see if everyone's aware of the risks and if there's any hazards associated with going into an area and clearing out rubbish from that particular area itself. Step 18 have been looking at the 5S audit and identifying what items have been identified for improvement on that. Step 19 would be agreeing start and finish times for the event. So what time you're going to start on the day and when you're going to finish. Agreeing the roles. So who was going to lead it, who was going to record up any actions on the visual management board, and who was going to sort of like be the person that kept an eye on the time to make sure the stand-up meetings didn't overrun in the morning and the stand-up meetings at the end of the day didn't overrun as well. We used to limit it to 15 minutes. So the stand-up meetings at the start and the end of the days on these events, we'd limit to just 15 minutes. And after that, we'd get stuck into doing the work itself. Step 21 was just making sure we had some cash available, just in case we didn't run out of something on the day. We could run out and get it, and we had cash. We didn't have to wait to get purchase orders. We had some cash available to buy some consumable items if we run out on the day itself. And then step 22, making sure all these roles and responsibilities are displayed so everyone's fully aware of what's involved, and they understand what their individual role is. So everyone feels like they're part of it. You know, they feel like they're bought into it and they're part of this activity. And it gives you the greatest fighting chance of actually getting stuck into doing and making quite a big difference in one day. And then finally, you do the 5S event itself, which is this sort, set, shine, and clearing out the area. So that's how I go about. If I was planning a 5S event, that's the steps I go through for planning out the event itself. Is everyone okay with that? Makes sense? Can you see the level of detail that we used to go into? You know, one of the things I wanted to sort of like illustrate with this is, you know, we never let anything go to chance. We used to try and literally think through everything that was involved in making sure this one day, you know, because it's a big commitment. You know, freeing up people for one day is a big commitment. So we used to put loads of effort into making sure that we had everything in place to make sure it went as well as possible. So it was a really good way of training people up and getting people to think through, you know, how to plan out an improvement activity as well. So by involving some of the team leaders in doing it and getting them involved in planning it out, it was a good way of upskilling them so they could think through how to plan out events to reduce down the risk of it going wrong. So the 5S mentioned to you before about the sort. So you're clearing out all the clutter. So if there's items in there that you don't use, you clear them out and you tag them. If you're not certain what it is, you tag it. If it's identified as something that's not being used that regular, you tag it. And if it's not safe, we used to tag them for repair and make sure we notified maintenance. So the idea being is that you go through the area and you tag out and you touch every item that's in that area, and you tag out all the ones that you're not certain that they should be kept within that area itself. And it's amazing what you find as you're going through and you're doing this kind of thing. It's amazing what kind of redundant items and redundant materials that you can find within an area. And the theory is that this is clutter that's stopping you getting to the things that you do need. So by going through and clearing out all this clutter, you free up more space for the things that you do actually need within the operation itself. And this is some examples. I think I might have shown you this before. So this is all the stuff that came out of one particular area that we were working in. So we went through and we tagged everything and we cleared out all the clutter. And that was the stuff that was actually needed to do the job itself. So this company, they made X-ray machines for food packaging lines. So that's what came off the benches, and that's what they actually needed. And basically, it was just cluttered and accumulating over a period of time. So by doing this and going through and challenging everything, we actually managed to free up quite a bit of space within the operation itself. The set is this idea of a place for everything in its place. So we used to use string diagrams. So we used to get a layout of a potting machine and of an area, and we used to sort of like draw on there the routes that people used to take as part of carrying out that operation. And if we found that people were walking backwards and forwards quite a bit to get particular tooling or equipment that they needed for the operation itself, that's when we'd consider putting a shadow board to reduce down that distance travelled. So it was a really good way of just quickly identifying, did we have the best layout possible, and where was the best position for the tooling to reduce down the amount of distance travelled. The shine, making sure the area is nice and tidy and clean and swept. Painting floors. I always used to paint the floor. As I was doing these 5S activities, I'd always make sure that we cleared out the areas completely. We painted the floors. We let it dry overnight, and then we put the equipment back the next day, and we used floor tape to mark out gangways and the position of the machinery, and drop zones for good products and bad products. So that's one of the things that we always used to do as part of our 5S activities. And we always used to paint the floor white. Even in some quite dirty manufacturing environments, we always used to paint the floor white. And we always used to have the theory that if we painted the floor white, as soon as it got mucky, as soon as it got dirty, then there was more chance of somebody picking up a broom and cleaning it, rather than if it was a dark floor, the chances are they just let it become a real big issue with contamination and dirt. So we always used to paint the floor white, regardless how dirty a process it was. That was one of the rules that we always had. And it always worked psychologically. It made such a big difference in trying to encourage people to keep the areas looking tidy. And it lifted up the light levels as well. The light levels in some of these areas, after you paint the floor white, it actually makes quite a big difference. It really does lift up the light levels. So we found that by doing that, it improved the light levels of the whole atmosphere of the area as well. I'll not take you through every line on this because it'd get quite tedious for you, I think, if I went through this line by line. But what this is what we've just been through to how to set up a 5S event. This is all about how you actually carry one out. So this is over the years I've built this up based on experience and what went well and what didn't go well. And I just keep modifying this, and it's what I use to train people up. So any of my team that want to do a 5S activity, I just use this as a working document for training people up on how to actually carry out a 5S activity. And it talks you through how you deliver briefs to the team. So how you get the team together, how you brief them as a stand-up meeting in the first 15 minutes, how you allocate out activities and tasks to them, how you get them working on doing the sort side of things, so the first S. As they're doing the sort, how they record down any ideas for improvement that they identify, and how that gets recorded. Any items that are identified as damaged that need repair, how they get recorded. Putting things in the 5S auction, doing the actual on the sort, identifying minimum max levels for storage items, so minimum and maximum quantities for packaging, say, for example, or locations of where things need to go. So whilst they're doing the sorts, they're also thinking through the set side of things and where they're actually going to locate the things that they need for normal operations. And this is what this covers. It even talks you through this bit here, which is mainly on the set. It even talks through how to go about making a shadow board. I used to make them out of cardboard first of all, work out where the optimum position was of all the tooling. And once I'd drawn around the outline of the tooling on a piece of cardboard, I then give that to a carpenter who used to then make me one up. Nowadays, you can literally, if you take a photograph of a shadow board and you send it to a printer, they'll even send you back like a printed outline of what a shadow board, and it's basically on sticky back, so you can just stick it straight onto a piece of ordinary board, so you can create a shadow board really easy. And they do some really nice things when they put company logos on the bottom as well. So visually, when you walk into an area and you see these shadow boards with company logos on, it carries quite a bit of impact, particularly, like I was saying earlier, about customers or people you're trying to attract to work within the business itself. So this is the set bit. So shadow boards using yellow tape, using min-max levels, Kanban systems. So 2 bins of consumables. When one bin empties, the empty bin is the trigger for replenishment. So little systems like that for making sure that any consumable items, we never run out of them. You know, so things like 2 bins of cellophane for wrapping, or shrink wrap for wrapping pallets next to the actual shrink wrapper itself, so that when you're down to your last roll of shrink wrap, that's the trigger to reorder, so that way you never run out of shrink wrap. So little things like that, little ways of making sure that you never run out of consumable items as well that are used within the operation. So a part of your set is thinking through what do you need to do the job, what's the best location, how do you introduce minimum max levels to make sure you never run out of these things. The shine element, the third S, is all about recording down what kind of things we need to do at the end of each day. So a normal working day, a little checklist of things that we need to do. So based up on our visual management board again. So empty the bins, sweep the floor down, make sure the tool is put back up on the shadow boards, make sure any consumables are replenished, any scrap is disposed of, any reject materials are disposed of appropriately. So there's like a checklist of things, and as people carry out these items at the end of each day, they simply just tick it off on the board, and then that way the team leaders can look at the whiteboard and they can make sure that everything's been done, and the operation is set up ready for the start of the next day or for the start of the next shift. And as part of that 5-minute shine, as we used to call it, if they've identified any areas for improvement, again, they log them on these problem resolution logs. And then once a week, we used to have a meeting to go through anything that had been logged on these problem resolution logs and talk through what improvements that we could do to improve things even further. And this is what this is talking about, this 5-minute shine, this visual check of what needs to be done at the end of each of the 5-minute shine. So on the 1 day 5S activity, basically you're putting together this checklist. You're agreeing with the team what this 5-minute shine activity looks like and what this checklist looks like. And at the end of the 5S day itself, getting the team back to your operations room where you've got your visual management board, or the canteen, and you've got the visual management board displayed up on a canteen, and just briefing everybody, thanking everybody, getting everyone's input for any more improvements that they can think about, and then closing out the day itself. I used to make sure at the end of the day we'd do something nice. So we'd either have a cake for the team, or we'd have a crate of beers for the team, or we'd have pizzas brought in. So it'd be, again, refreshments, thanking everybody. We have a little bit of a half an hour of a social as well at the end of the day to thank the teams for everything that they've done over and above what is normal activity. The 4FS Standardise, which is documenting the best way of doing these kind of things. I mentioned earlier what I used to do. I used to take photographs. So what I'd quite often do, if we sorted out, say, a consumable cupboard that's got lots of labels in it, loads of like packaging materials, and normally these kind of things look an absolute mess. And we used to get it all sorted out. We'd have it all labelled up. Once I got it looking the way I wanted it to look, I'd take a photograph and I'd stick the photograph on the front of the cabinet and the consumable cupboard itself. And that was the aim of the 5-minute shine was to make sure it looked like that photograph on the front of the cabinet. So when you open the doors up, it should look like the photograph. And if it didn't, that was an issue, that was a problem. So that became the visual standard that we used for that particular cabinet. And then we just took that out across the whole business, and we had visual photographs of what each area should look like at the end of each day. And everyone was trained up to make sure that that it needed to look that way. So it was a way of keeping it simple and making sure that everyone was aware of what the standards are. The idea of the 5S and the way we go about doing it is to try and involve as many people as possible. And by involving those people, hopefully they get a better understanding of the reasons why you're doing it, and therefore there's more chance of them working this way. So, you know, everyone's working this way across the business. You haven't just got one or two people working this way. Hopefully everybody works this way within the business, which is what you need. Because if you just have one or two people doing it, very quickly they'll become demoralised, and they'll just drop down to the lowest common denominator. They'll just work the way that everyone else is working and not put things back and not tidy up at the end of the day. And that quickly becomes the culture within the organisation. So by hopefully involving everybody and everyone feeling like they're a bit of a part of it, you lift the standards up within the organisation for the workplace organisation. And the other reason for doing these 5S's, I think I mentioned to you earlier, it's, you know, 5S is a really good way of sustaining improvements as well within a business. Because if all you do is improvement activity, or Kaizen activity, Japanese word for improvement, Kaizen, what happens is you carry an improvement, and if you don't standardise, people just slip back to the old ways of doing things. And then you do another improvement, and then people slip back to the old ways of doing things, and you just end up not just bouncing along, doing lots and lots of improvements, and then everybody complaining that they don't actually make any difference within the business itself. Whereas what we always try and get across in Lean is what you need to do is some form of improvement activity, so like a waste walk, but then you use 5S as a way of standardising things and making sure these changes get adopted and they're sustained within the operation. And then that gives you your platform for your next improvement, your next Kaizen activity. And that way, by doing this sort of a combination of improvement activity and then standardisation, you get a sustainable improvement across the business itself. So that's another reason for thinking about doing these 5S kind of things. You know, say you did a big waste walk, you'd improve the layout, then going in there and using 5S to make sure you had a place for everything and everything in its place, and you add visual standards and you add checklists and you're doing audits to make sure it stays that way. This gives you this sustained improvement. So that's another reason for thinking about 5S itself. Because this can sometimes be a problem in businesses. I think sometimes what happens is the business just focuses on doing improvements all the time. And if you don't allow time for the business to stabilise, you can end up burning people out, you know, because people get tired. It's tiring doing improvements on top of doing the day-to-day. It can become quite tiring. So these periods of standardisation, it's a good way of allowing people to get their energy levels back again and their enthusiasm back again before you do the next improvements as well. So it's it means it's more sustainable from a business point of view as well. And then the sustain element, really the sustain element for me just comes down to doing more audits. So doing regular audits. I used to do them on a monthly basis. So I split the business up into different areas. Each area I'd have a 5S champion, so somebody who was responsible for 5S within that area. They'd carry out an audit, they'd record further improvement actions, and then they'd display that on the visual management board. And basically, the management team had regularly walking around, management bar walking about. They'd regularly walk around, look at these visual management boards, look at the 5S audits, make sure the scores were going in the right direction, and basically that just check to make sure the improvements were being carried out. So by doing more audits, by getting the management team involved and making sure the audits are staying in place, this allows you to sustain the improvements itself and make sure that it carries on going. It's not just a one-off activity, it's part of a regular activity. And this is hopefully what you'll start to see within your audits. what you'll start to see, if you plot them on a radar chart, the red one is the first audit and the first score that they had. And then as you do more and more audits and improve more and more improvements, you should grow the size of the radar plot and the radar plot itself as you start to improve the area and the 5S within the area. So that's what you're ultimately trying to achieve. So just a bit of a summary, really, of the kind of things. Make sure you involve as many people as possible. Make sure senior management are involved. So not only from a briefing point of view, but also from this regular reviews of the visual management boards. Make sure you've got a problem resolution log and you review weekly what ideas people have suggested on the problem resolution log. Carry out regular 5S audits. I used to do always on a monthly basis. Mention about splitting the business up into sections. So you'd have one named person responsible for 5S in each individual part of the business itself. Make sure that the management do a monthly Gemba walk. Gemba just mean the shop floor of the workplace. So walking around, looking at the visual management boards, taking an interest in what problems and what ideas have been suggested. Make it fun. So I was mentioning about the 1 days 5S events that I used to organise. I'd always make sure that we had pizza and cake and a few beers at the end of the day, and we'd publicly thank the people. There's one business I do work with. They do a 5S audit every month, and they've got like a Premier League table of all the different areas and all the different scores. And every month they have spot prizes for whichever areas improved the most, or come up with the most suggestions for improvement. So they've tried to make it quite a bit of fun as well for people that work with the business, so they can encourage them to get more and more involved in it. Which is what this is. So basically rewarding the teams, making sure the teams, if they request extra tooling or equipment to be able to carry out the job, they get those items that they've requested within reason. Obviously, you don't spend an absolute fortune, but within reason, they get the tooling that's been requested, and therefore that encourages them and gives them a little bit of confidence to come up with more ideas and more suggestions on how to improve things. And that's the summary slide on 5S, so just a bit of a repeat of what the 5S's are. The Japanese is on the inside, the Japanese translation and the origins of where 5S comes from. But that's basically a summary of what the 5S's mean.